Two-pointer puts it up. Too strong. Rebound. Bridges tips it out to Crowder. Booker for three. DeAndre ate the rebound. Paul for three. Bang! Middle to the drive. Blocked by Ayton. Saved by Bridges. Soundstripe.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Basketball in the Mountains. I'm your host, as always, Tyler King, the college sports reporter for the Denver Gazette, back talking hoops here in the Mountain Time Zone. And today, as you can tell by the intro video, we're talking back about the NBA. A little bit of kind of a two-parter solo episode for me here on the feed today, as unfortunately got some injury news to discuss for both the Suns and the Jazz today. We're going to start off with Phoenix, who obviously lost Jalen Green. Before I get into any of this stuff today, I appreciate everybody who's been listening to the feed lately. I really, really appreciate it. Been talking a lot of college hoops on the feed. Got some great guests on the show. Recently had on the previous episode, if you missed it, we had DU coach Tim Bergstrasser on the feed talking about his first week of his first season with the Pioneers. After we recorded it, a couple days later, they got their first win under him, beat Montana State in dramatic fashion after a couple tough games at Seattle and Washington to start the year. A little bit of a 3-game road trip for DU to begin the Bergstrasser era, but happy for them that they ended it with a win. So make sure to go check that episode out. We talked, obviously, at the end of that episode about DU's move to the WCC coming next summer. So I'm going to be talking a lot of college hoops, and just like a scheduling or programming note, I should say, the schedule I've kind of alluded to that we're going to be running here on the show throughout the season now that both college and NBA are fully underway is probably going to be talking NBA on Mondays, most likely with hopefully a special guest during the week, trying to set some stuff up, and won't be every week for sure, but trying to get guests in the middle of the week to kind of, whether it's college or NBA, just to kind of really, really dial in on teams here in the Mountain Time Zone and kind of spotlight some of the key figures. And then on Fridays, we'll be back talking mostly about college hoops, just with Saturday being the big day usually for college hoops during the week, with just about a lot of teams in action as well. There's usually always a marquee game or something to talk about. So that's kind of the schedule going forward. Like I said, a solo episode here for me today. We're going to be not really going to be talking a ton of Nuggets there. We will at some point after this, with this hot start, their Nuggets obviously I think are 7-2 now, right where they should be, number 2 in the West at this point. Nikola Jokic is Nikola Jokic. He's been incredible, a walking triple-double to start this year. Somehow he keeps elevating year after year. And we'll be talking about the Nuggets plenty throughout the season. But today, have to talk about Phoenix and have to talk about Utah. We'll start with Phoenix because there's been some big injury news with both teams. Phoenix, despite being 5-5 and having an impressive start to the year, Devin Booker's been great. I think he's top 6 in the NBA in scoring. He's been shooting the ball really well. I think 40-some% from 3. I've liked a lot. Dylan Brooks has had a positive impact. He's only played in 4 games, but he's been a positive impact. Grayson Allen's played pretty well, shot it well. I'm trying to think. Mark Williams has been nice. Has made a nice impact right away. I've always been a big Colin Gillespie guy, as you know, he's a Villanova Philly guy as well. But the big bummer of the news with Jalen Green likely now being out for a couple more weeks with his hamstring injury that he suffered in the preseason and kept him out until very recently. Last week, he made his Suns debut in dramatic fashion, played really, really well in that 115-102 win over the Clippers. They had 2 straight games against the Clippers, one at home, one away, and the Suns swept both of them to get to 5-5, which is impressive, even though in the first game, I don't think either Kawhi or James Harden played, but still, Jalen Green only needed 23 minutes to score 29 points in his first game. Shot 50% from the field, 46% from 3. Was getting to the was distributing, getting to the rim, and just looked like exactly what Suns fans are hoping for, to have that kind of presence on the perimeter in the backcourt alongside Devin Booker. Because while Devin Booker has played really well to start this season, it was going to be tough for him to sustain this level with very little help in the backcourt. Like I said, I've been impressed with Colin Gillespie and Grayson Allen. Seems like he's shooting the ball like he did a couple of years ago and found that in that aspect of refound that aspect of his game again. And Royce O'Neal's been shooting the ball pretty well. They've been getting good production from a variety of guys. But without like a real secondary ball handler on the perimeter that could alleviate pressure off Devin Booker and run the offense when he's on the bench, because he's been playing a heavy minutes load to start the season, which obviously he's capable of, but you want to keep him as fresh as possible throughout the season. And Jalen Green in his first game looked like the perfect complement to him. Obviously, everybody who listened to the Kevin Durant emergency trade podcast I did back in the summer knows I'm not the biggest fan of Jalen Green. I thought, I wasn't coming into the year. I haven't been impressed with him his first couple of years of his career in Houston, but I kind of got Phoenix taking the swing a little bit, especially when you get Kaman Malawach. That was, to me, the centerpiece of the KD trade was getting Kaman Malawach at 10 overall with that first round pick they got. Even though Kaman really hasn't played a ton to start his rookie season in the NBA, I just think I'm still bought into him as a long-term prospect, both defensively and offensively. But this year was kind of figuring out for the Suns if the Devin Booker Jalen Green experiment could work, because it's kind of the year to reset a little bit. Obviously, Jordan Knott coming in as first-year coach, he's a very different mold of what they had recently with the experienced head coaches. Like a Coach Bud, like a Monty Williams, like a Frank Vogel, the guys that they kind of ran through the last couple of years in the Booker, KD, Beal era, that none of them worked out. Jordan Knott was a little bit different. You thought the defensive intensity would increase with him as a head coach, and that would become more of identity, which it has so far this year. I think the Suns are like 19th in defense, which is certainly somewhat of a step up from last year, and I just think the overall intensity has been pretty solid. They're also shooting a ton more threes. I think they're number one in the league in terms of percentage of points coming from threes, if I'm not mistaken. So the style has changed a little bit. They're getting better production from guys that maybe had down years last year, Devin Booker included, who I'm obviously a huge Devin Booker fan. I have been for a long time, but he didn't have his best year last year, even if some of the numbers the numbers were average, but they weren't like super terrible. He just didn't look like the same guy. And obviously that the Suns last year just kind of were a disaster overall, with everybody being pretty unhappy. And this was kind of supposed to be a refresh season. And like I said, seeing if Jalen Green and Devin Booker can work out, seeing if it's not an uncommon thing, seeing a guy like Jalen Green, who was a high draft pick, a high recruit, even though he went and played for the G League Ignite before and didn't go the college route. These highly touted guys, sometimes it works out at a second stop. It's that's not unheard of at all for some key guys in the league. It hasn't really happened a ton with star players, but with role players and quality starter players, I think of a guy like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who really bounced around and before he found his identity the last couple of years in Minnesota. There are guys like that were first round picks that maybe didn't work out at their first spot. And maybe adapted their game and kind of learned some tough lessons. And maybe that would be Jalen Green this year. And it was only really one game and one quarter, because he re-aggravates that hamstring injury with less than a minute left in that second Clippers game. And it's like, oh man, like you were just starting to feel like, the Suns are starting to find they're fully back to health and all that kind of stuff, and getting to full strength and seeing what this team could look like under Jordan Knott and all that kind of stuff. And now it just feels like he's probably going to be out for a couple weeks with this hamstring injury, because honestly, it didn't look great watching it, even from afar. Like, not being able to put any weight on that leg. He kind of knew immediately, like, he couldn't even like get back up and down the floor for a defensive possession. They had to commit a foul in the last minute of that first quarter. It's just such a bummer, because like I said, even though I haven't been the biggest Jalen Green fan throughout his career, you could not be anything but encouraged by that first game. And he only had 2 points, I think, in that first quarter, but of the second Clippers game. But I was just intrigued to see it, to be honest. Like, I think I was higher on the Suns than other people were nationally coming into the season. Obviously the over-under, we did that podcast, the over-under wins total was like 31.5. And I had them over because, I mean, they won like 35 or 36 games last year in a disaster season. And there's no reason they couldn't have won, still can't win 34 games this year. They're off to a solid start at 500. I think they'll still be a below 500 team. And maybe they sneak in as like the 9th or 10th team in the play-in. I think that's kind of the ceiling for this squad, especially if Jalen Green is going to be, out for a couple more weeks here. And then he's going to have to reacclimate himself and try to work his way back in and all that kind of stuff. but it's just kind of a bummer to what was kind of a refreshing first couple weeks for the Suns. Like I said, Mark Williams, I thought has looked good and he's been healthy, which is the biggest thing for him. Like it is for a lot of these guys. Ryan Dunn coming off the bench has been pretty solid. Like I said, Grayson Allen, Royce O'Neal hitting shots surrounding Devin Booker. Colin Gillespie looks like a solid backup point guard kind of thing. It's not as a dire of a situation as maybe it seemed like in the summer after the Durant thing blows up. Bradley Beal gets bought out. There was a lot of good vibes with the Suns team going into the year, and they kind of backed it up with the 5-5 start, despite a couple maybe frustrating losses that won to Utah early in the year, which we'll talk about them shortly. But you just got to be bummed if you're a Suns fan, and maybe you just got to hope that Devin Booker is able to stay healthy and keep this team afloat until Jalen Green can get back. Maybe around Christmas time, or slightly before. I think you're shooting for that Christmas time would be ideal for him for coming back. That would be about 6 weeks from now. So, and then once you get into the new year, just trying to find the identity you were hoping to have at the beginning of the season. And it's a bummer that you're gonna probably have to wait until January to figure that out. But I just think you got to kind of ride the wave here, Phoenix. If you're a Phoenix fan, because you got to be encouraged by what you've seen so far from a bunch of the guys, like I said. But I understand the Jalen Green injury being a bummer, even for people who maybe weren't as high on him as Suns fans. But I'll wrap up that part of the conversation with that, and we'll get over to talking about the Jazz, because they also have suffered a more, I don't know if more devastating is the correct term, but it's obviously a longer term injury for them, with Walker Kessler being out for the year now with a shoulder injury. He had surgery last week. It was a little bit surprising. Obviously, he suffered that injury. He's been a guy who's had injuries throughout his career, which is also super disappointing for him because he was playing so well to start, really efficient offensively, look like a defensive anchor, all that kind of stuff that has had Jazz fans encouraged throughout the first couple of years of his career. Looked like he would take maybe a slight step up and becoming one of the top half of the league type center kind of guys. And now that he's out for the rest of the year, the Jazz were always going to be fully in tank mode regardless, just because of the way the roster has been set up. And the fact that they still, even though Lauri Markkanen has looked like a dude once again after a really impressive Eurobasket, and kind of bouncing back from last year where he's in and out of the lineup, all that kind of stuff, not being like the all-star caliber player he was in his first couple of years in Utah. He has, for the most part of this year, he has looked like that, despite Utah winning 2 of their first 3, and now I think they've lost 5 of their last 6. But there have been encouraging signs up and down. I think the Utah roster, I think Keontae George is a guy that I've talked about a little bit on Twitter, just how impressed I've been with him. He's another guy kind of like Jalen Green. I was actually higher on Keontae as a prospect. I liked what I saw from him coming out of Baylor. I was excited to see what he could be. In the NBA as kind of a lead ball handler, a guy that puts pressure on the rim. I always thought the shot was going to take some time to develop, and it obviously hasn't been great this year, but that hasn't mattered. He's been a much better playmaker. He's getting to the free throw line. He's finishing better around the rim, all that kind of stuff. He just seems like he's taken a clear leap here in year 3, which I'm going to be honest, I wasn't expecting after his first few years, but that's certainly encouraging. Like I said, Lauri Markkanen is encouraging. I'm still pretty high on Kyle Filipowski after what he did as a rookie and then in summer league. Ace Bailey has kind of had an up and down start, but I don't know. I didn't have a ton of expectations. Obviously, I've said this many times. I wasn't the biggest fan of Ace as a draft prospect, but I get Utah taking a swing on him. The veteran guys like Steve Mikhailou, Yusuf Nurkic have provided some decent play. Kyle Anderson off the bench as well. I've always been a big fan of Taylor Hendricks and Bryce Sensabaugh. I loved what I saw from him in summer league. He hasn't maybe lived up to it, and he just hasn't shot the ball well. And that's kind of his one make or break skill in the NBA. If he's going to make it as a key rotation player, he's going to be a lethal knockdown shooter, which he just hasn't been to start the year. Maybe that turns around, but there are plenty of encouraging signs. Obviously Will Hardy's been a great coach. I've heaped a ton of praise on him throughout my time talking on this podcast. So obviously I think the Walker Kessler injury is what it is at this point. I think you're going to be disappointed if you're a Jazz fan because you're not going to see him out there and see the development, because I thought he was taking a step forward. But now I just kind of don't know what comes next in this season. I always felt like it was another tank year. We talked about this earlier in the summer, but like last year was the only real year in this Jazz era that they've truly tanked the whole season. Basically, they had the lowest win total in franchise history after the last couple of years, starting out the season pretty hot, and then at the end, like really taking the foot off the gas to try to get a better draft pick. And they got like Taylor Hendricks and Cody Williams in the back half of the lottery. Whereas last year they get the 5th pick and get Ace Bailey. You're shooting for a top 3 pick this year, even though this appears to be like a loaded draft class. And I think if Jazz fans are looking to get, you can just drive down to Provo and get a good look at AJ DeBanza all year long, because he's a guy that is going to be worth top 3 pick consideration at minimum. If the Jazz end up there, which they probably hope to at this point of the season. But I think the only other question that this Walker Kessler injury brings is what happens with Lauri Markkanen, because he's still I think that the Jazz have been hesitant to trade him. He's 28 years old. He turns 29 at the end, not the end of at the end of the season in May. After this season is going to be over for Utah. And I just don't know if he matches up with the timeline. We've talked about this before on the show. Like I've been a Lauri Markkanen fan. I know Utah wants to have a guy that you feel like you can build around, and they did well to get him in the Donovan Mitchell trade, along with the picks, all the picks they got. Getting a quality player like Lauri Markkanen that has been, for the majority of his tenure in Utah, a borderline all-star player. That's great. That's great work by the front office. But now it might be time to try to cash in on him, even if the window to really maximize his value passed last summer before he signed that big contract extension where he's making close to $50 million a year now. I think this is something I've talked about with friends kind of off air and stuff like that. Like I would be really trying to invest, if I could, in the future of the Warriors in the post Steph era. Like if you can get some of their late 20s picks at the end of this decade or early next decade, even, I think that would be a wise investment for any franchise in the league, but especially the Jazz with Golden State being interested in Lauri Markkanen before they got Jimmy Butler. That would obviously be tough to do at this point. But I think that this is just going to be a topic of conversation throughout the rest of the season for Utah, because Lauri's going to continue to play pretty well. I feel like, he's averaging 28 points per game, 6 rebounds. He's shooting the ball pretty well, 45% from the field. What is he shooting from 3? Let me just double check this here so I have this right. Shooting 33%. That's not great. That's below his career average. He's shooting 89% from the line, which he's getting there to a career high 7 times per game, which has been really impressive to see. But like I said, this is just going to be a topic of conversation now for the Jazz throughout the season, with the losses are likely going to continue to pile up, despite, like I said, the pretty encouraging start where they were 2-1. They beat they obviously beat the Clippers and the Suns early in the year. They had that incredible win at Boston last week, where they hit the buzzer beater on Yusuf Nurkic getting the offensive board and the putback. But the last couple games haven't really been that competitive, at Detroit, at Minnesota. I know that was a really long road trip for them, 5 games with 4 of them on the East Coast. They're back home tonight as I'm recording this against Minnesota, a team they got smoked by the other day. Then they've got Indiana, Atlanta, and Chicago all at home over the next 2 weeks. Pretty long homestand here, actually, for Utah. Maybe they win a couple of these games and keep the momentum going, or refine momentum, I should say. But I just think this Lauri Markkanen thing is going to come to a head at some point as we approach the traded line. I would still maybe be a little bit surprised if he is moved this in season, although who knows? Anybody, they could get blown away with kind of a Godfather offer that the Jazz would be silly to say no to. But I think next summer is just going to be the conversation. It's all going to depend, as we talked about before the season, like what the Jazz get in the draft. Like, you're shooting for that top 3 pick. Darren Peterson, Cam Boozer, AJ DeBanza, all those guys would be incredibly helpful pieces and could be the number 1 guy that this team maybe has been lacking. Because I'm still not sold that Ace Bailey could be a number 1 type of guy. I still am encouraged that he could be a quality starter and a number 3 or even number 2 option maybe for a really good team. But you're still searching for that foundational number 1 guy that you're building everything around, and all 3 of those guys at the top of the draft. And maybe there's even a couple other guys, which as the season winds on in college, there's a couple other guys I think could emerge as I don't know if anybody's going to break into that top 3, but guys like Koa Pete, Nate Ahmed, Mikal Brown Jr., like there's a couple guys in college that have had encouraging starts that I think even if the Jazz don't get a top 3 pick, which, man, that would be pretty discouraging after 2 straight years of likely pretty bad, a lot of losing. So that you got to keep your fingers crossed there if you're a Jazz fan trying to get that top pick. But it's just a bummer, this Walker Kessler injury, and not one that I expected. I obviously, seeing him go out with that shoulder injury, you feel like, okay, maybe he'll be out for a couple weeks, but he'll come back. But that season-ending injury announcement was pretty devastating for this group, because it's going to be a lot of Yusef Nurkic, maybe Taylor Hendricks, some small ball five, Kyle Filipowski, Laurie maybe a little bit as well. But Walker Kessler was so key to racking up wins and kind of taking this group taking a step forward after last year, the kind of 17 wins they had, and all that kind of stuff. So that'll do it for today's episode of Basketball in the Mountains. Make sure to subscribe to the channel wherever you're listening, Spotify or Apple. Appreciate everybody bearing with me here for this solo episode, talking NBA. Even though it's kind of a disappointing episode with both Utah and Phoenix suffering some key injuries over the last week or so, after, like I said, pretty encouraging starts for both teams. So appreciate everybody who's watching. If you're doing so on Spotify or on YouTube, subscribe to the channel there to make sure you never miss an episode. Turn your notifications on, all that kind of stuff. We're going to have great guests on as the season goes along, both in college and in the NBA, talking about all these great teams and fun fan bases here in the Mountain Time Zone. That I appreciate everybody who does tune in on a regular basis. It really means a lot to me. Make sure to, if you're subscribed to the channel, leave a comment, leave a 5-star review. All that kind of stuff really helps me grow the show and get it out to all the fan bases here in the Mountain Time Zone, which I'm super appreciative to be able to have the show and have the platform to talk about all these teams, which I think are all really fun to do so, which is the reason I started this podcast in the first place. So appreciate everybody for listening today or watching wherever you're doing so, and enjoy the week of basketball.